Okay, well, I'm having another long distance call to Australia. I've been calling Australian composers the past few days. We have had some wonderful video interviews. Today, that is to say tomorrow morning, for Paul Stanhope in Sydney, I'm interviewing the fabulous Australian composer conductor Paul Stanhope. We're going to speak about just a little niche of his incredible oeuvre, which is referring to his choral music, because we are looking at his CD from 2017, yeah, that's right, an ABC Classics release in Australia, 2017, Sydney Chamber Choir, wonderful ensemble. I love the timbre of the sopranos, of the high voices, the high women voices in the choirs. Beautiful, beautiful timbre. The CD is called Lux Aeterna. It has on it 8 works that scan, what, I think I read something about 4 years, but I think it's more than that. The first piece is 1999, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. It's more like, yeah, it's close to 20 years of work, really. Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. Including, in my view, at least two or three, or maybe 4 of the 8 are absolute stunning masterpieces. And I'm going to try and ask you to help enlighten us a little bit about these works that I'm about to mention. As I just mentioned, the Sydney Chamber Choir, beautiful ensemble. You know, choirs are generally amateur choirs, but as you mentioned in your liner notes, in the best sense, very dedicated musicians. And the word amateur is really almost specious, if that's the right word to use, in referring to this level of singing. So, and you've had a long experience, haven't you? With why don't we just start right there? You've had a great long experience with Sydney Chamber Choir. Give us an overview of how that has gone.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used the word amateur, because I actually like it, because it means for the love,
Mm-hmm.
in its original sense. So that's what these musicians do. They come in for the love of it, but they bring high level expertise too. So yes, my story with Sydney Chamber Choir began when I was a postgraduate student at Peter Skolthorpe at the University of Sydney, and so I joined Sydney Chamber Choir because it was this high level ensemble. And I sort of sung here and there in other groups, and I kind of stayed singing with them for about 10 years, and I learned so much doing that from the insides of the working of a choir, and then wrote an early song cycle for this group, and then in 2006 I began as their musical director, having kind of had some experience at directing other ensembles, and so about 10 years of patchwork kind of conducting experience, and then was musical director of this group until 2015. And then this CD has kind of been an extension of that tradition of working with this group, that long tradition of working with them over 20 years really, and that's been a terrific thing to be able to continue that relationship.
Yeah, and you mentioned, by the way, we should mention you went on to a better job as a senior lecturer in composition at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. That's a division of the University of Sydney. Is that how it works? The
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Part of the University of Sydney.
And you're
Yeah.
artistic chair of the Australia Ensemble, and I had a little peek while I was getting ready to see you. And so, of course, you're responsible for more and more and more music making in Australia and Sydney in particular.
That's a really lovely position to work
Yeah.
with the top flight positions in that group.
So let's say I kind of forgot where I was. You were talking about your relationship with this choir. We talked about the really um, almost indescribable, which is a wonderful thing, a very special sound this choir has. But again, you're also have received. Oh, that's what I was going to do. Read your credits. Here we go. Let's see here. University artistic chair. We did that, but you of course have lost them all now. But your orchestral output. What was the award you just received? Some sort of national award for composition.
Yeah, no, I received the Orchestral Work of the Year award from the Australian Music Centre and APRA, which is our Performing Arts Organisation.
And I'll find that note somewhere, of course, later.
Sure.
Let's sort of talk. I guess it's time to just sort of have. I guess let's describe what I hear, and then it's part of a bigger question that I'm skipping around a little bit. But I love your juicy soft dissonances, you know, and they're excruciatingly delicious. How am I doing on adjectives, resolutions? But you know what I mean. Well, you do, of course, but I hear it more and more in newer choral music. This relishing of soft dissonances is the only way I can describe it. That sit there on top of each other for a while.
Yeah.
And is that it leads to my question about writing choral music these days. It seems like maybe there's a golden age going on or something with Lauritsen and yourself and others. Speak to that about writing choral music.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you like the dissonances. I just hear them as colour.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of, extend this idea of a sort of a pyramid structure of chords where you have larger intervals at the bottom and then smaller ones at the top. And that kind of is able to colour these chords. And juicy is a nice word. I like that one too.
And I wondered I really wondered was whether even just today as I was re-listening to your CD, whether there's been some kind of change or shift in the writing. That's what I'm getting at as composers have discovered more and more this wonder of dissonance and resolution in a whole different site than maybe in the 50s or 40s. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, look, I think it is a continuing evolution, and the more the more that I compose, the more I'm kind of exploring little bits and pieces here and there. Depends a lot on the context, often, of the commission. Who's writing, how far you push the elements out. But with working with Sydney Chamber quite a while, I've been able to do things which essentially can't sight read because they're too hard. But by the time where we get to sort of the third rehearsal, it's completely there. So it's interesting that working and the choir has worked with me long enough to know that okay, we're not going to be able to get this on our first run, as we can for early music, but we know that by the next rehearsal, the next one after that, we will be making sense of that, and that's been the benefit of that long relationship with the group.
Yeah, and also you've just spoken about kind of the metamorphosis of the development of the ear, even amongst singers. That little by little, I use my own analogy. As a kid, I listened to all of the Bernstein symphonies. At age 14, it was noise. I could hear nothing. And now, of course, they're gorgeous, beautiful symphonies. And this is what we were talking about in terms of color. And I'm a little lost, so you're going to have to help me out here. But I'm looking at let's talk about the title piece for a moment. Lux Aeterna. First of all, a somewhat silly question, but maybe not. It's how come? What was the decision about that being the title? It could have been so many other things. Anything at all?
Yeah.
Or just
No, it could have been many things. I think the idea that these dichotomies of light and dark are themes that permeate the album, the CD as a whole, those works. So they can go from sort of obvious things, such as the first track, which is all about the lights in the sky, the Genesis story, the creation, through to Lux Aeterna, light being an important aspect and the comforting nature of that movement in the Requiem, and then that goes through to kind of darker meanings in some of the other pieces where we're looking at exile and the kind of poisonous aspect of displacement and human displacement.
You're speaking of the three choruses, the three lamentations. Yeah. By the way, the last I can't even hardly see my writing my typing I put here, so I'm referring to the CD. Forgive me for looking down and everything. But the lament in particular, destroyed me.
The text is amazing, and it's kind of amazing how little I did really with it. It's and maybe that's why it's successful is because of letting the quite simple lines speak and these amazing words.
Yeah. And what you just said, would you have said the same thing about an orchestral piece? This is where I'm so curious because you're so good at both.
Orchestras. I kind of like the ability of being able to explore linear things in orchestral writing too. That aspect and colour, absolutely, in a similar way to choral voicing. You can approach the elements of an orchestra in a very different way to what you can in be a bit more architectural. There's not the text there to grapple with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question.
I'm not quite sure if my question was worthwhile, but sometimes I think of choral music and instrumental music as being apples and oranges, and then I run into composers who are just equally adept in both areas, and I just kind of wonder, is it that easy? Am I just making too much out of this, or what? And apparently, music is music, color is color. The forces you have to work with, you work with. You said instrumental music is maybe you enjoy a little more linear kind of activity. Did I understand that? And I also love. Were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's also. I think for me, being able to work with the text is always a really great joy, and there's stuff that I feel like I can always mould around it. It's a really enjoyable relationship with the text.
Yes.
Writing music.
And we've mentioned earlier, I believe, if not off camera, that composers intrigue me because they are so mysterious. Every single one of you, don't deny it for a minute. And especially, now we're going to talk about text a little bit. I was intrigued by the Agnus Dei, "Do not stand at my grave and weep," and what you spoke and I'm going to quote it even, spoke in your liner notes. And the reason I'm quoting it is because I want to know what on earth, where did you pull this one out of what corner of your brain? Okay, quote. The piece uses the two texts, Latin Requiem and Mary Elizabeth Fry's poem, "Do not stand at my grave and weep." Here's the composer that I want to ask you, where'd you come up with this one? The two of them, these two ideas, in a conversation which traverses mortality. The Agnus Dei represents a ritual of the living who need to mourn, whereas Mary Fry's poem speaks of life and hope from beyond the grave. And I just went, I took a heavy, deep breath and then re-listened to it.
Right, yeah.
Tell me how all that comes together in your head. How does that work? And then how do you express it, if you can?
That's just how I imagined the two texts interacting. And it was written for a chorister who very sadly had passed away in the choir that I was writing it for. And so I kind of wanted to have, this sort of existential conversation about this ritual of mourning and what's it about. The ritual texts are wonderful. The Agnus Dei, they're rather abstract in a way, and are gratifying when they're repeated in many different ways. And that kind of gives a textural bed in a way, so that the quite personal text from Mary Elizabeth Fry can kind of sit on top of that, and then there are various windows where the ritual text comes through and dominates, and then there are others where the kind of more personal text, becomes the more dominant force, and so they are in this conversation, and that's how I kind of heard the piece when I was writing it. So I guess it kind of speaks a little bit to my composition process. Yeah.
I'll say, and it's I'll say as in what? I'm pulling your leg just a bit, but I think what I'm trying to say to everybody, and my audience are a lot of professional musicians, but it's like, pay attention. Remember, everybody, it ain't easy. It's not throwing paint at a canvas. It's these kind of processes that create art in all art. So there's just so much superb choral music on this CD, and I'm kind of the orchestra conductor guy, so my huge repertoire is in orchestral music, and of course I've been exposed to and I've been listening to an awful lot of choral music, but can you tell me, without your ego becoming too challenged, how are these works? I'm thinking that a lot of, in North America particularly, USA, a lot of choral conductors are going to be really excited to learn about this CD, or are you a household word even in give me a town, Omaha, Nebraska?
No, look, I'm not that well known in the US, and I would absolutely love, for any choral directors to be interested in any of the works. Some of them have some quite Australian themes, such as "The Land Is Healed," and that yes. Could probably be there is some exotic interest in there. And then other things are I'm hoping are quite programmable, that they might fit together with older pieces.
Interesting.
So, for example, I mean, Happy St. Cecilia's Day, for example, which it still is in the US today. And so St. Cecilia, that wonderful Hymn to St. Cecilia by Benjamin Britten, I've kind of written a sequel in my CD there, The Lament to St. Cecilia. And
I'll find it, because you also quote. Go ahead and keep talking while I try desperately to find this quote. Go ahead, about St. Cecilia.
So the piece ends with a little quote from the Britten piece, and it finishes in the same key as the Britten one. So if any choir is ever adventurous enough, they could run the two pieces together. And I would really kind of love to hear someone adventurous enough to do that one day.
Interesting. And here's the quote. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say here's the quote, and this is what I love so much about purpose.
Right.
And about reveal, if you will. We all, most of us know St. Cecilia, the patron saint of music, and composers have written for hundreds of years praise cantatas and anthems and so on. It's all very marvelous. And then this guy comes along and decides he's going to compose something called Lament of St. Cecilia. But here's what Benjamin Britten said. You know this quote. Quote, "It is cruel, that music should be so beautiful. It has the beauty of loneliness and of pain, of strength and freedom, the beauty of disappointment and never satisfied love." Once again, my heart palpitates a bit, and I think, oh, of course, just like comedy, the tragedy that is within comedy, and so on. So
he was quite young when he wrote that too. That's from quite an early diary, but so perceptive, and yeah, I think that's a wonderful quote. Music is so beautiful, and yet it causes us musicians such heartache in order to kind of strive to the levels of perfection that St. Cecilia kind of expect of us, and we strive for. So I found Britten's quote, and then all this wonderful poem that I've set, quite cathartic actually, and it was good therapy.
She's Canadian or
she's Venezuelan.
Oh, yeah. I think, and I thought you used another Uruguayan poet or something somewhere.
Uruguay, not
Uruguay. There you go. So now we have it straight. Okay, excellent. Yeah, wonderful, amazing. And I always wonder, all my composer friends who write music with text, how do they? First of all, it takes 8 hours to write 3 seconds. Where do you find the time to sit back and read poetry and find some lovely piece? By the way, how did your compositional thing come up? Let's go there in the same story, because to me it's like, what as a little kid did you assemble tiny little creatures and structures, or what? You know what I mean? That mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think I started writing little ditties at the piano at the age of 7, and my dad helped me write them down. I've still got the manuscript of it somewhere.
So he was a musician in the family, your father?
Not really, not sort of, yeah.
Amateur kind of.
Sort of amateur. Didn't have much of a music education. So I was really, I was much more privileged to get a really thorough music education through my life, and did composing bits here and there as a teenager, and found it dreadfully difficult, and thought, no, this is too hard. I'm not going to do this. And it was only kind of later in my sort of my early 20s that I started getting more fascinated by putting the dot on the page, and just kept going.
Because the discipline is tremendous, and that's why I like being in my youth anyway, being a conductor. You flap your hands. The musicians have played that symphony 18,000 times. It's I'm being somewhat facetious, but just the idea of that, and also the solitude.
I don't mind the solitude. I usually have very busy teaching days, so when I've got a stretch of time just to be in my workroom by myself, I absolutely love it. So that and that kind of being lost in that world of composing. I mean, it can be something of a mental battle at times, but at the same time, there's something really enjoyable about being so kind of going sort of so deep inside, and it's almost like an act of meditation, I think.
Mm-hmm.
really that far into a piece.
Which I guess is all art, really. I come to think of it, a writer.
Yeah, I think so.
Even a conductor, even a facile conductor, creates a landscape of thought. How's that? And by the way, you mentioned early on that your idea, or correct me, but you mentioned early on that your purpose is to uplift.
Yeah, I think that is a broad brushstrokes are very much something that I'm interested in doing. I think the responsibility of art is to go through some troubled territory at times, but to find a pathway through it. And it might just be an invitation to find a particular pathway through something. I mean, those Exile Lamentation choruses are a classic example. Some pretty troubling kind of themes in there of displacement
but important, very important, and very topical,
yeah.
And very much in need of being explored in this genre by human ears, by human minds.
Yeah, trying to also find a balance of the layering of history as well. That different cultures at different times having experienced this feeling of exile. But hopefully, having gone through those quite cathartic feelings, that you might feel that there is a way to work through difficult things as well. So uplift is definitely high on my agenda, but I'm also at pains to explain that I think discovering quite dark material and exploring that is a pretty important part of the process.
Yes, it's a part of our psyche. It always drives me crazy when people say, "Oh, I don't want to hear all that bad stuff," and I want to just slap them around. I mean, that's the other joy of human existence: the good, the bad, the ugly, the painful, the exhilarating. All of it. It's so important to the building of our own intellectual understanding of what this thing is that we're stuck with for 85 years or so.
Yes, and that's what art is, I think. Really exploring all those manifestations of humanity.
Yeah, I just interviewed. My last interview was with a string quartet about the Shostakovich 7th, 8th, and 9th string quartets.
Right.
And
wow.
These quartets are from a man who is like so close to suicide. In other words, and he says so in this music. And is it something we turn away from these quartets, or no? We want to experience what that was, and he has given us that gift, as you do also with these very serious subjects of the Lamentations. Is there a piece that you are dying to talk about that I've forgotten all about on this CD? I'm just looking through it here.
Well, look, that's a good invitation, isn't it? I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the Land is Healed, actually, because it's from a much bigger piece.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, let's do that. I remember I had it in my notes. So good. Let's talk about that from the bigger piece to this and so on.
So this is probably something that your US viewers don't know very much about Australian Aboriginal culture. I think when visitors come to Australia, very fascinated to know about the different cultures that we have of our Indigenous people. And we have a pretty sad history. And so part of this idea of
we Americans don't need to feel quite so ashamed. Yes, but boy, at least those of us who have brains know all about the Aborigine history in Australia. Same thing as the Americans and their treatment of Native Americans. So.
Sure, we do share some common threads there. So this story of Jundamara he was a man in the 1880s and 1890s who began a resistance movement against the invasion of traditional lands by white pastoralists and policemen. So in this little piece here, the land is healed. Jundamara, who has been leading this resistance movement, his quest is also to sing home a snake spirit, Ilmuri Ungud, back to his home. And it's this part of the story that, despite the devastation and death all around, this idea that the snake spirit who has fled from his sacred spring because of the desolation of the land has come back, and that point is celebrated in this song. And so there's many layers to explore in the story and the levels of the text. And we've got some, the text is written by Steve Hawke, who's the son of a former Prime Minister here in Australia. Yep.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection at all. What? That's fascinating.
It's interesting, yeah. And he lived in Bunuba country in the Kimberley, which is part of the northwestern of Australia, Western Australia. It's a very large area.
Sparsely populated, right? That whole northwestern sector.
Very sparsely populated, exactly. And so to get to Bunuba country, from Sydney, you have to fly about 6 hours, and then drive another 5 hours after that. So it's a long way. It's absolutely amazing part of the world, Kimberley. We have this, I think, cliche of the Australian outback being desert and quite harsh. Yet the Kimberley is lush. It's full of green, full of water, and very kind of dramatic cliff faces. If you think of the Grand Canyon, there's aspects of that landscape in Bunuba country. And here we have a people who are about 20,000 strong, fighting a resistance movement against this invasion in the late 19th century. And the governor at the time had made it legal for basically for white Australians to shoot Indigenous people and to shoot to kill. It's a pretty dark period. So this piece is really a celebration of survival and of victory amidst quite a devastating landscape there.
The land is healed.
Yeah.
Bangaree. Have I pronounced it properly?
Bangaree. Yeah. So that's there's quite a bit of Bunuba language in this song, and Bangaree just means he is back. It's a celebration of the snake.
And so I think what we have here, thank you very much for that story, for that elucidation of that story, of that piece, but also it gives people an idea of what a wide variety of choral music is on this CD, just a wide variety of your music. Paul Stanhope, we're going to have to run it down here. Many thanks for giving me some time on your, whatever it is, Friday morning, late morning. We are talking again, just to put in a plug in all of this, the video interview, the video interview, all the links to buy the CD, all that good stuff is going to go up at my site, performingartsreview.net, and in probably the next couple of days, and then I promise Paul a review. That's the last thing on my list after I get caught up on interviews. The CD is called Lux Aeterna. It consists eight works, I think, including the 3 movement piece. Yeah, eight works for choir. The Sydney Chamber Choir are the artists on this recording. Yours truly, Paul Stanhope, is conducting. And yes, who did I forget? Or were you just heaving a sigh of boredom?
No. I was saying you've got it there.
Oh, okay, good. I've got it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I thought you were had something that I'd forgotten.
No.
So there you go. Again, Paul, thank you very much for giving me some time on your afternoon or late morning, and we'll be in touch again.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks. Bye.